Now, I know I've done a David Haye video a few days ago, and I just thought I wanted to do another one because there's a lots of few developments that have happened since the last video, and I just wanted to touch upon some of those events and some of the statements that David Haye himself has made, and some statements that have been put forward by Tony Bellew and some of his other fans and in social media. I just think that, looking back at this whole David Haye comeback, I think that there was a lot of, mistakes in the run-up to this big comeback. Now, I'm not like a boxing expert, I'm just a fan with an opinion, and I just want to, just let my thoughts be known. But in my opinion, I think that the whole comeback, David Haye comeback, went about the wrong way, and I'll tell you the reason why. Here is a man who was a great cruiserweight. He did some good things at heavyweight, becoming champion, and he was fast. He was powerful, and we expected that David Haye to show up in the Tony Bellew fight. But what you have to remember, and what we all have to remember, I'm not sure if I said this in my last post, was that was David Haye. He hasn't been in a competitive fight for 5 years. So Tony Bellew said the other day on Sky Sports, David Haye was going to, he was claiming to knock me out in 2 rounds, and I was still there in the 5th. But David Haye hasn't been in a competitive fight for 5 years. So you can't say that David Haye was at his best. He wasn't at his best. He may have trained hard for the fight, but he wasn't at his best because there was clearly ring rust there. His timing was off. His balance was off. He was clearly, had a lot of ring rust there, and so it wasn't David Haye at his best. It was David Haye at his worst. So I don't think you can say, he should have knocked me out in the first 2 rounds. That's what he said he was going to do. Yeah, he did say that, but at the end of the day, he's been out for 5 years. He hadn't been in a competitive fight for 5 years. Of course, there's going to be ring rust there. So it wasn't the best of David Haye, not at all. But I think, going back to that, the whole comeback thing was approached in the wrong way. And the reason I say that is because if you look at Derek Chisora, okay, I'll use him as an example. My facts ain't 100% here in terms of how many times he fought before he fought Pulev, but he was very, very active. He was fighting very, very frequently. He was fighting once every 2-3 months, and he racked up a whole load of wins. I think it's about 6 or 7 wins before he fought Kubrat Pulev, and that's what David Haye should have done when he came back. He should have fought not Mark Demori, who was literally a no one, not the other guy, I can't pronounce his name. He should have fought, fighters who were very durable, but ones that were going to get that ring rust out of the way. Maybe David Haye wanted to prove a point, come back after 5 years, smash a few people up, and prove that he was the fast and destructive heavyweight that he once was and always will be. But what I think he should have done was, had a few tune-up fights, fight more frequently, fight every 3 months, for example, and just fight, European to fringe world contenders, get a few rounds under your belt, get that timing back, get that speed back, get your form back, get to know what weight you're more comfortable at, are you comfortable at 17 stone, at 16 stone, at more 15 stone? Do you retain, what sort of power do you have at 15, 16 stone? Experiment, and then take on a high profile fight against somebody like Tony Bellew, because David Haye wasn't at his best when he fought Tony Bellew because he was inactive for 5 years. Of course, his time is going to be off. He's fought 2 fights. He's fought 5 rounds in 5 years. Doesn't make sense. So I think what he should have done was, had a few more tune-up fights, and a lot more tune-up fights, maybe 4 or 5 decent contenders just to get that ring rust out, just to ease his way back in, and then think about a fight against Tony Bellew. I mean, what would have been the rush if he had said, well, I'm not going to fight Tony Bellew, but I'm going to fight these guys a bit more frequently, some decent contenders, get some rounds in, and he would have went up the rankings slowly but surely. He would have went up the rankings, and then after maybe 5 or 6 fights, then think about fighting somebody like Tony Bellew or Wilder or whatever options he had. But now, what did he do? He tried to rush it, and he rushed it, and he's damaged his leg, and now he's going to wait 9 months, come back, and if he's going to try and do the same thing, fight 2 unknown guys, and then put himself forward for a big fight, the same thing's going to happen. So, can he be bothered to do that? Can he be bothered to kind of wait 9 months and build himself up slowly to a good level, and then fight when he's in peak condition? Or is he just gonna get ready, get prepared, heal his Achilles, and then just come back and do what he did in the first comeback and fight two unknown fighters, and then put himself in a high profile fight and just and get beaten, which is what happened against Tony Bellew. Now, I go back to what I said before. This was the worst David Haye we've seen, and he still managed to be winning the fight before the injury. So I always maintain that if I was Tony Bellew, I wouldn't have been 100% satisfied with that victory, because it was a David Haye that was inexperienced. It was David Haye that had ring rust, and it wasn't the best David Haye. But I think the whole training thing was also wrong. He came in far too heavy. He looked ponderous. He looked off balanced, and he didn't look like he carried the weight well. He looked slow. So I think he's partly to blame for it, and maybe even Shane McGuigan might even be partly to blame for that. I think Shane should have said, should have identified. Maybe they underestimated Tony Bellew. Maybe they thought, we're going to go and we're going to be too powerful, too strong. If you go in heavy, you're going to hit him with a great shot and you're going to knock him out. And maybe they got the tactics wrong. Maybe that's what it was. But a few of my friends and a few other people have said they thought that David Haye went into this fight too heavy, and if he'd gone in lighter, then he could have retained some of that speed and some of that power, because with the speed comes the power. If you're slow, you might have power, but if you're not landing those shots, if you're too slow, you're not gonna land any shots against a lighter man who's quicker on his feet. So I think that they should have fought more times prior to fighting Tony Bellew. I think he was too heavy. I think that was a mistake. I think focusing on raw power was a mistake. I think they should have focused more on speed, stamina, strategy, timing. I think that's what they should have focused on. Raw power was a mistake, just to go in there thinking they were going to blaze him out. And I think to myself, well, here is a former unified cruiserweight champion and former heavyweight champion. You've got a good trainer in McGuigan, and then he comes back, fights 2 bums, and then fights Tony Bellew, comes in very heavy, and just looks terrible. I mean, we all know as boxing fans that when you come back from a long layoff, there's going to be ring rust. So 2 fights isn't going to get rid of that ring rust. You need a good, solid 4 or 5 fights to really get into the swing of things, in my opinion. So with all their professional knowledge and expertise, why did they think that he would come back and have 2 fights and then be ready for someone like Tony Bellew, who's been far more active, who's been in dogfights, who is at his peak? I just don't understand why they would think that. And even when the fight was happening, I think Shane McGuigan should have been a little bit more. I wonder what he was saying to David Haye when he was in between rounds. The first round when he was trying to catch him with the haymakers. The second round, I would have said, look, calm down. We're in it for the long haul. Let's just wait. Let's be patient. Let's wait for that knockout. Just wait for it. Don't just try and force the issue, because it clearly isn't going to work. So in my opinion, I think that those are the main reasons. I think those are the things that played a big factor in this so-called comeback. And I think these were the errors that they made in going in too heavy, not having enough tune-up fights, and taking the Tony Bellew fight too early, and the strategies that they used and the training methods they used. I don't think it was very good. And David Haye has now come back and said, well, I'm going to return after 9 months, but after my Achilles heals. But will he be able to compete at that level after 9 months? Is he going to be that much of a draw when he comes back? I'm not sure. I think it's going to be very difficult. He's battle worn. He's prone to injury, and because of those reasons, I don't think that it's going to be very wise for him to come back. And I thought when he had his comeback fight, to go back and look at my original videos, I said that David Haye will beat Anthony Joshua, beat Tyson Fury, beat Deontay Wilder, beat them all. But looking at him now and his last performance, I don't think it's possible. But having said that, if he does come back and he does the right thing by slowly building his career up again, by taking good fights, fighting durable fighters, getting that ring rust out, getting a few 5-10 rounds under his belt, and he does that a few times, then I think it's possible. But if he's going to do exactly what he done now in his comeback in 9 months, I don't think it's going to work, because you have to continually. I mean, he's had issues with his injuries. If you don't train often enough, and this is just hypothetical, I'm not suggesting this is true, but I kind of get the feeling that David Haye was saying that when you train sporadically, when you don't train frequently enough, and then all of a sudden you put pressure on your body, you're prone to injury. So I think that what he may have done was maybe taken a bit of a long layoff and then started training very heavily when he went into the Tony Bellew fight. When he went into the camp, I think what he may have done was had a bit of a long layoff and then got back into training and just went in full steam ahead, and then that's why those injuries occurred. Maybe he should be a little bit more consistent in his training. And maybe that's why he's so prone to injury. Maybe because he isn't training frequently enough, perhaps, or not sort of easing his way back into things and putting too much pressure on his body too soon. That's the point I'm trying to make anyway. But I just feel like I needed to make this post because I hear a lot of people who saying, David Haye looked, Tony Bellew said, I didn't expect him to be so slow. He was quite strong, but he's slow. I built him up to be this great heavyweight, and he wasn't. But that's not actually true, because you didn't fight David Haye at his best. You fought him at his worst. But fair play to Tony Bellew. I mean, one thing that I haven't said in my previous post was how much of a gentleman Tony Bellew's been, and he's been very complimentary of David Haye. He said things like, he was a fantastic fighter, he's a fantastic athlete. I wouldn't have beat him in his prime. Hardest puncher I've ever faced. He wasn't overly okay. He did, he did do some things, after his he won the title. He sort of kicked that thing at David Haye, and then he sort of started, going into one and almost attacked David Haye. And in the beginning he did do stuff like that, but generally speaking, he has been quite complimentary of David Haye, and I think he conducted himself more like a gentleman than he did than David Haye done. So I've got to give him maximum respect for that, and also for taking some of David Haye's best shots. So I think Tony Bellew is definitely gone up in my estimation, and I have a lot more respect for him then. But I just think that David Haye has gone about this whole comeback thing, or went about the whole comeback thing in the wrong way, and I think it's resulted in him having to suffer a bad injury, and he's back. He's resigned back to those hospital beds and treatments and a long layoff. I personally think Jay McGuigan is a great trainer, but I think David Haye should maybe go back to Adam Booth, perhaps. But anyway, I just wanted to make this post to see what you lot think as well. So leave your comments in the section below, and thanks for listening.